identified as moments where you can see the paramilitaries are losing their power to the drug dealers. I mean, they talk about this great divide, the Loyalists and the Republicans. They do business together when it comes to drugs. I think we heard evidence during the Regency trial of how Gerry Hutch and Jonathan Dowdall travelled north to give back the guns that were used to the paramilitaries as a sweetener to them. And they were really there looking for them to step in as the mediators. They wanted these paramilitary individuals to step in and to say to Daniel Kinihan, back it up, mate. This is Ireland.
One of the fascinating things in the book is it goes into detail about the interactions between the drug world and the paramilitary. In the Republic, it'd be Republican, but in the North it can be Loyalist too. Sometimes it's working together, but often it's a clash too, you know.
Well, it's interesting because there's been two kind of instances over the past sort of decade that I have really sort of identified as moments where you can see the paramilitaries are losing their power to the drug dealers. And one of them was after the Regency Hotel, when you see the Hutch faction try to take out Daniel Kinihan. They have done so with the support of the paramilitaries, and they're kind of returning, looking for help. I think we heard evidence during the Regency trial of how Gerry Hutch and Jonathan Dowdall travelled north to give back the guns that were used to the paramilitaries as a sweetener to them. And they were really there looking for them to step in as the mediators. They wanted these paramilitary individuals to step in and to say to Daniel Kinihan, back it up, mate. This is Ireland. We hold power. And you can see that they don't hold any power because they either don't get a meeting with Daniel Kinihan. You know, he can't be arsed even listening to what they have to say, or they've sort of backed it up. They've realised the firepower coming from the drug dealers and they pull away. And for me, that is a moment where you can see that balance of power has shifted. The second, really, I suppose, is that whole idea that Robbie Lawler, the gangland psychopath who was behind the murder of Cian Mulready Woods, the young teenager from Drogheda, who was murdered and dismembered and his body parts left in different locations in order to threaten the rival gangs. Robbie Lawler was the guy who did that. He is within months shot dead in Belfast in an estate called Ardoyne, where people initially, when the body is even lying in the garden, are whispering, is he really from Dublin? Is this actually a drug dealer? And there's a sense of, did he get killed because he came up here trying to do his drug dealing in our place? But actually, behind the scenes and untangle it, he's very much active in the North. You know, he's partnered up with, as have most of the dealers. In actual fact, the South is supplying the North with cocaine and all the rest of it. And there's no longer that North-South. It's quaint almost within the criminal underworld to consider that the southern drug dealers aren't allowed up in the North. It's quaint to consider that you don't do business with anyone. I mean, they talk about this great divide, the Loyalists and the Republicans. They do business together when it comes to drugs. There is no loyalties. There's no political beliefs when it comes to a business deal over cocaine. And that's very evident over the past few years, as evident as it has been that the paramilitaries don't hold the same power. And of course, listen, the old IRA were not drug dealing. Certainly there isn't any massive evidence that they were. There was pockets of various people operating for them who were. I think when that breaks down and you have the INLA, the Real-IRA, the Continuity IRA, the New Continuity IRA, all these various factions that keep dividing and whatever, they are very much active in the drug market. That's what they are. They are drug gangs who are hiding behind the name of a paramilitary, a Republican or a Loyalist organization. They're funding any activities they still have around that through drug dealing. And you can see that globally, like Hamas in Palestine are funded by Hezbollah. Hezbollah and Iran have been funded by the growth of the cocaine industry and the demand for it in Europe, they've been taking up to 20% on each deal because they are the money launderers. They're the guys who are doing the organizing the Hawala system. They are the ones that are being paid to help move the funds and move the drugs through, unfriendly territories. So terrorism, and again, all those things that we absolutely abhor and we don't want, and they affect our lives, even filtering back from 2 wars now and in Europe, in Ukraine and in Israel, is going to affect everything financially. And yet we still go out as a nation, week in, week out, and pay money into the pockets of the drug dealers who are funding the terrorists. So it's just crazy. Human beings are just we're just blindly walking into this blizzard of cocaine, and we just don't seem to know how to connect the dots.
I think, would I be right in saying the last instance of drug dealers and IRA men, in this case the real IRA, actually killing each other, where there's in Ireland at least, would I be right in saying that was the in North Dublin, kind of Alan and Vinnie Ryan, that really stepped into like killing each other, not just talking,
That's a really interesting point, the Ryans and what goes on there. And we talked about the timeline and when was drugs available everywhere. And I suppose we're trying to look at the finances behind it. When is this explosion of cocaine? And that time when Alan Ryan comes down to Dublin and starts, heavy handling the drug dealers, looking for a cut of their profits. That's a really interesting time between about 2009, 2010, 2012. So obviously people are making a fortune. He wants to come in on the action. He is heading up the Dublin brigade of the Real IRA. He's putting the heavy on many people to cut him in on their profits. Some of them pay up, others don't. And his heavy-handedness then turns to murder. His gang are responsible for the murder of a number of dealers who push back on him, including Mick Kelly, aka the Panda. He refuses to pay up and is shot dead. He and his brother are leading these gang of thugs, basically. The Northern Command, kind of, the figures don't add up for them. They're giving something into the purse up there, but not enough. And they quickly realise that they're trousering the money themselves down here. This greed has taken over. And when it's decided that Ryan needs to be taken out, Christy Kinihan sanctions it, but the paramilitaries also sanction it. And Eamon Kelly is a criminal who is sort of pops up at the beginning of the book. He's one of the first cocaine cowboys, an ex-paramilitary himself, who sort of goes on to age like a fine wine in gangland and become a mentor to many. He sits back and he advises the young dealers how to run their businesses, how to launder their funds. He steps in to settle disputes and all the rest of it. And he is this sort of elder figure. And in retaliation for Alan Ryan's murder, he finds himself shot dead in Colester in 2012 outside his home. He's 65. He's just got his bus pass. He's certainly heading for retirement of sorts, as this great sage of gangland. And I think, again, even within the underworld, that's a very dark period, and it shows the changing face of gangland, how cocaine has changed everything. There are no rules obeyed anymore. There's these very dangerous young sort of generation of dealers coming into the market who are very greedy and who are willing to do anything to hold their patch. And yeah, it's an interesting time period if you delve into that from the perspective of looking at it as a social history of gangland, really.
Yeah, at one stage, a person in the book who was under threat from drug gangs, or from drug dealers, he actually hires one paramilitary to protect him against another group. That
Yes,
was
yeah. That, of course, is Jim Mansfield Jr., who ends up with this absolute incredible situation in the family home um, in Saggart, to Saggart House, where he has various groupings of paramilitaries all living under his roof, protecting him. And a third group is eventually brought in to try and clear everybody out, and they end up getting uh, tangled up in this kidnap plot, which lands the whole lot of them, including Jim Mansfield Jr., before the courts um, on charges. So, yes, the protection rackets that go on, like, no clean and easy way to go into the drug business and make a bit of money and pull yourself out of it. A few people have tried, and an interesting character that I included in the book would be a guy called Philip Barron, the Baron of Straffan. He was known, an Englishman who came over to Ireland, bought a house on the outskirts of the K Club, and was secretly running this massive cocaine business with some business partners. And he was running it as a business. They had this very interesting way of looking at uh, losses, which they literally just put on the balance sheet as losses. And they didn't go out and kill anyone for them. They just accepted them. They sucked them up as part of the business model. So they reckoned their profits were so vast that they could suck up some of the losses. So if there was drugs seized or caught, or delivery drivers, whatever, and it was estimated they had shipped 300 million worth of cocaine around the globe by the time they were caught. But Barron, looks as if he has managed to perfect the model, and he's living in Straffan. He has a beautiful house, Bentley car. He's on the social scene. He's attending race meetings with his wife. He's socializing with all the right people. His children are in private schools in Dublin, where they have horses and stables, and they're all very. You look into that family and it looks like a place you'd love to be, but actually he's caught and he's extradited back to the UK, and it just shows that, I don't know, is there any magic dust? Is there any way in and out of the drug business that you can make your money and run? I'm sure some people, probably the ones I don't know of, have managed to do that and set themselves up for life. But it seems to me that you're almost selling your soul to the devil. Once you go in, it seems to be a very, very, very hard way to get back out of it.
Right, right. I don't know. I don't know if this is confirmed, and I couldn't tell you where I read it. I did read it online, but I heard that even Johnny Morrissey, working for the biggest like supranational or multinational rather company in the country, and you say responsible for, believe, like 90%. I read that on a routine basis he was giving protection money to the IRA. He was driving it out to him. I don't know. Do you know if that's true? It would certainly speak volumes about
Yeah.
the power of them. Like,
Well, he was living here in Ireland, in Kinsale, actually, where he had a restaurant in the 90s, the early 90s. And that was a period. So the Criminal Assets Bureau was set up in 1996. And before that, so the early 90s, so there's a period of time, about 6 years, where we are awash in this country with these very wealthy, usually English and Dutch drug barons, who kind of like can hide out here, can look as if they're just like wealthy businessmen, and they're just not in their own countries. They've time to run if anything bad happens, but they're not very far away. They're not in Dubai. They're People can visit. They're a short trip away from their own home. So we did have a huge amount of them living and sort of seeking refuge here. Johnny Morrissey was one of them, and he was so wealthy, and he sort of came in like he's a big, brash, loud guy anyway. And he was spreading the cash to such an extent around Kinsale that they called him Johnny Cash, as only the Irish could. So he certainly was very obviously operating. Now, while it was never proved, they did suspect that he was doing what we see a lot of people doing now, and he was going out to sea to navigated markers to collect cocaine that had been dropped off ships. And that's why he was here, ultimately, not for any other reason. But the IRA, look, if the IRA knew somebody was making money out of drugs, they most certainly would have knocked on the door and paid up. And there was a point that people paid up. That 100% happened. Whether Johnny Morrissey did or not, Johnny Morrissey is as mean as they come. Despite his wealth, he knows where every penny is and where every penny is gone. When the Criminal Assets Bureau moved in on him, to take 500,000 in a bank account and a property, not very much in the greater scheme of things, considering this is a guy who was just caught earlier this year laundering 200 million over an 18-month period. Small change to him. But Johnny Morrissey took umbrage to such an extent against the Criminal Assets Bureau that he plotted to kill its legal officer, Barry Galvin, at the time. And Galvin was the first civilian in Ireland ever issued with a firearm to protect himself. Like Morrissey was that incensed to lose what I would call his pocket change. So I've always reckoned that if the IRA came knocking, he would have tried to fight back on them. And I think ultimately he wouldn't have paid up. That's not to say they didn't ask. Mickey Green, another very famous cocaine dealer known as the Pimpernel, who was somebody actually who did die in retirement in Spain, but was always suspected of being helpful to authorities, shall we say. He was living in Ireland under the radar, fabulously wealthy guy, and got pissed one night in town and got in behind the wheel of his Bentley and crashed into a poor taxi driver who actually died because it was a hit and run situation. And the man had 8 children and spoke to his widow many years ago, an absolutely gorgeous woman who never got any insurance payment, nothing. And she was left with 8 children on her own on a widow's pension. But Mickey Green, was identified as who he was at that point of that crash because there was an investigation into it. He was charged before the courts. And, it became public knowledge that Mickey Green was living in Ireland, that he had invested in a couple of properties and that he was basing himself here. And it was after that became public knowledge that he left the country because the IRA started to feel his collar, looking for money off him. So I don't know, were they know everything that was happening? Did they know everybody who was living in the country? Did they know? They certainly, if they knew there was drug dealers in the country making money, they certainly knocked the doors looking for a cut.